I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Sakina Canada and Sakina US. With me, I have the wonderful Huma Saidi, who is a psychotherapist working at CAMH, as well as a director and co-founder of Cedar Way Therapy. And Huma is actually a lot more accomplished than what I'm saying, but this is a very short bio. Most importantly to us, Huma is one of our board members. Thanks so much for joining us today, Huma.
My pleasure.
Um, Today, we're going to have a very important discussion on perinatal, which used to be and is more commonly referred to as postpartum depression and anxiety. We're going to stick to this agenda loosely for the day or for the next hour, sorry. And at the end, we will have a Q&A period. You can scan this, and I suggest doing this now while it's up on your window, but you can scan this directly on your phone and submit your questions anonymously. I'll also enter the link to open it up right on your computer as well. And then you can just ask them anonymously. And at the end, Huma and myself will take some turns answering. So I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, so let's talk about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, or perinatal depression, perinatal anxiety. Huma, what is it?
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see and hear, and we're hoping to really make this a bit more casual, so not hopefully me teaching too much, but I do think it's important that we start with the whole, what are we even talking about? I think to start with, just the whole new moms often have what we call, baby blues after childbirth, which really is often what we stereotype it to be, which is mood swings, crying, anxiety, problems with sleep. And this is really typically, within the first few days after delivery, and it can last up to about a couple weeks. So not usually too long. However, there are a significant portion of new moms that do experience a more severe, long-lasting form of depression, which is commonly known as postpartum depression, PPD. It's also sometimes called peripartum depression because, unlike what we stereotypically think, it can start during pregnancy as well and continue after childbirth. Um, a newer thing that people are talking about, and it's, even though it's not newer, is postpartum anxiety. Well, while it's been more discussed as a term in recent years, it's obviously been around for as long as time has been here of us having babies. It really is when a person experiences really more severe anxiety after having a baby. Those anxious feelings feel kind of out of control and can take over your thoughts. So to be clear, there is obviously always some level of worry that happens after you have a new baby. But if you have postpartum anxiety, that worry can kind of become more all-consuming, make you feel worried all day, all night, and lead you to have some irrational fears and worries. So yeah, there's definitely overlap between postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. Just because you have one doesn't mean you're going to have the other, but you can actually have both. So it's just something important to keep in mind. While there is overlap, they are both distinct.
Okay. You touched on this a bit, but why is it called perinatal depression and anxiety? I know that's a new term. A lot
Yeah.
of people were confused or asked why we're calling it perinatal depression and anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, this was something even, I mean, I was telling Hafsa earlier, my mom had even asked me, she's like, is it perinatal? Is it postpartum? Is it a typo in the ad? Or I was like, no, I mean, it really is the understanding finally of healthcare professionals is that perinatal really just means that period during pregnancy, which is what we call prenatal, and the weeks after childbirth, which is postpartum. So it's just the term, overarching term to really encompass that, hey, the depression, anxiety can start in the period during pregnancy and can continue or start in the period after childbirth. But to be honest, most commonly, episodes of perinatal depression and anxiety begin within those first few weeks after the baby is born, which is why I would say that most people still refer to it as postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety.
Right. So I know I'll be sharing more about my journey, some of the other questions, but I struggled with perinatal anxiety and postpartum anxiety, depression.
Mm,
Alhamdulillah, it completely skipped me, but I definitely had perinatal anxiety, and I didn't even know you can get more anxious during pregnancy. Um, Unfortunately, I dealt with it with two of my pregnancies, so my first and my third and my last. My middle child was just completely chill the whole time. But I had no clue that you can have feelings of anxiety that are so stressful and heightened before you have children, and I feel, or before you actually give birth. And I think with you also talked about this earlier too, but we often hear of postpartum depression, but so few people know that there's such thing as postpartum anxiety or perinatal anxiety. I remember when I was so anxious, and my mom said that, but you're not sad, right? Like you're not sad. And I'm like, no, I'm not sad. She's like, okay. She's like, I just want to make sure it's not postpartum depression. And at that time, this was almost 10 years ago, I had no
Mhm.
clue that there wasn't even a term for it. I just thought I was just a nervous wreck all the time. Because I think so often a lot of literature and a lot of what people talk about is only postpartum depression or beyond the baby blues. Like they talk about the baby blues. Like if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling scared, then you should seek help. But that anxious bit is often missed. And so that said,
No,
is it common? Like, is it very common? I have very few friends that struggled through it. And I thought that I was an outlier because I talked about it so much afterwards. And I have a friend who recently gave birth, and it is all, alhamdulillah, rainbows and butterflies for her. So is it normal? Is it something that a lot of women deal with?
um, so first of all, I mean, just to kind of touch base on that for a minute, what you noted is, I think that's the biggest reason why I'm happy we're doing this is postpartum depression is finally, I think more people know about. Postpartum anxiety, like literally what your story just said, is that it's not as commonly known. People don't know what it is. It's almost more confusing, right? Like I think many of us now know is like, let's be aware for, the new mom to see if she has postpartum depression. And for those people that have felt ever depression and anxiety, they're fully different feelings, right? It just feels so different in terms of how common it is. Postpartum anxiety, studies show it's about 11 to 21% of new moms. So it's a significant amount, right? So it's definitely not, 1 to 2%. It's 11 to 21% of new moms. And I'll be honest with you, I'm sure it's higher. This is just based on, people actually endorsing things. And what we know is that there is a lot of stigma and shame that still remains when it comes to anything around postpartum.
Mhm.
When it comes to the depression, it's even more. It's about 1 out of 7 new moms develop postpartum depression. But I also think that's, like I said, is there is more knowledge and understanding and perhaps a little bit less stigma around postpartum depression than there is around postpartum anxiety. Um, but I mean, in terms of contrasting that, baby blues, like that more normal
Mhm.
thing that people talk about, that's about 80% of new moms. So there is some amount of, I'm not feeling great, I'm feeling
Yeah.
low. That
Yeah.
happens for the vast majority of new moms. So, needless to say, Hafsa, you were not alone, but I'm sure it felt like you were alone.
Mhm.
And I guess how did you figure out that you had postpartum anxiety? Was that something that you know, got help around, or how did that go down?
So with my first, um, I had no clue. I've only ever heard of postpartum depression. So I didn't know that me being anxious was a thing. Like I have always had anxious parents.
Mm,
My father is more anxious than my mom. But we were very limited in certain things that we can do and can't do because my parents were always worried that something bad's going to happen. So I thought, you know what, this is just what happens to all parents. We become anxious messes. I didn't know I had postpartum anxiety or prepartum, prenatal anxiety at all because I thought it was normal. And it wasn't. I actually wrote an article for the Huffington Post. This was back then when they
oh,
allowed, yeah, people to write about whatever. And I wrote about my experience, my first year of being a mom and how difficult it was. And in it, I wrote things like I slept with one eye open for the first 3 months. I didn't let anyone else sleep if I was sleeping. Someone had to be watching my baby. I didn't let anyone hold my child, nothing. Like it was just, I wrote so much in that article. And then I recently read it not too long ago, and I was like, this is red flag postpartum anxiety. And no one really flagged it, but a few people commented on the article saying, you need help. Like, I don't know if they were being nice, but they were just like, you need help. This is not normal. And so I didn't really know I had it, but after I started researching more and really taking my own journey into mental health and everything, um, and hearing other people's stories, then I kind of was like, wow, I cannot believe I had it. And it was very difficult. And I think someone, Mariam, commented here that she felt like an outcast when she struggled with it. And that's it exactly. People would say, why can't I hold your baby? Even family members, I think
Yeah.
they meant well, but they'd be like, why can't I just do this? She doesn't even trust us with the baby. No, it was out of my hands. Like it took everything in me to even trust my spouse
Mm.
with my baby because I was like, okay, what if he doesn't know how to hold the baby? What if the baby
Yeah.
cries and he doesn't know how to calm the baby? Like there's just so many things. And I at that point, during the whole 1 year after having a baby, I did not think that I had anxiety at all. But it was when I started learning more about it. And so with my third pregnancy, right from the beginning, when I started feeling all these feelings of as soon as it kicked in, and it was very early on, I would say it was 9 weeks. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, the anxious feelings, and they were much more heightened, escalated than they were ever before. And right away, I knew I needed help.
Okay.
And it was a very difficult time to the point where I hated being pregnant. Like I was so
Mm.
miserable and so down about it because I was just, I didn't want it at that point because not because I didn't want my child, but because it was just such a stressful time that I was like, I need this baby to be born today. And I remember telling my doctor, can you induce me? What's the earliest you can induce me? And I was like
Okay.
10 weeks pregnant at this time. And she said, you have a long way to go. And that wasn't my OB. When I went to my OB and I told her, listen, I'm very anxious. I don't know what to do. And she says, okay, well, there's several things we can do. Do you want to look at medication? I've never tried anxiety medication at that time, so I was wary.
Yeah.
She said, do you have a therapist? Do you talk to someone? Do you have someone you can trust and talk to? And I have my sister. She's actually on this call as well. She's someone that I can have proper one-on-one, unfiltered conversations, knowing that she's never going to judge me. She's only going to support me. But at the same time, like a therapist is completely different. Like it's someone who
Yes.
you're not burdening a therapist. Like I always feel like as the eldest daughter, I always feel like I'm a burden on anyone I complain to. So I ramped up my therapy sessions. And then I did find a lot of comfort in praying. And I did do both that. But then also my OB, when I told her that I needed help, she asked what she could do for me to help ease this time for me. And that was, I think, the best response to give because there was so much that she couldn't do. But she said,
Yeah.
what can I do to help make this as comfortable? She's like, it might not be as enjoyable as you want it to be, but what can I do to give you comfort? I'm like, just listen to me. When I say something's wrong, don't brush it against the under the rug. And she says, no problem. And then she says, what else can I do? And then I said, how about not more non-stress tests towards the end? Because it's usually the end where I'm just a mess.
Yes.
And she says, no problem. Those are like not invasive at all. We can do that. She's like, anytime you need to come in for an appointment, I can even ramp up your appointments to more often. So you see a doctor, you're getting your the heartbeat checked. She's like,
Okay.
I will do everything I can. And she was wonderful. And I tell everyone in my area to go see her because she never made me feel as if I was an
Yes.
outcast or I was different for not
Yeah.
enjoying
You're
my
going crazy or,
yes. And
and
she listened to everything I said and she became like my therapist at some point too. I was just tell her, I just feel like it's too good to be true. And she's like, it's not. She's like, you're fine. The baby's fine. Um, and so that's when I knew I had prenatal anxiety is because I educated myself a lot after having my eldest that I kind of knew to spot those signs and knew that there's no harm in asking for help.
Yes.
I think that's
And
a really big one.
yeah, I was just going to say, and I love that you actually also advocated for yourself with the healthcare system, which I mean, I don't know about you. I felt like it was hard to do sometimes.
Mhm.
I had a great person helping with delivery, but it's still the whole asking for that. You know, I might need a few extra minutes to ask questions where I don't know for others, but I know I always felt like I was rushed out of my appointments.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it is, which is hard, and where you might actually ask somebody else to come with you to help you advocate if you need that is I might just have a few more questions than the average new mom. Um, can we do that? I am feeling
Yeah.
anxious because I do think, like you said, is just her being able to not gaslight you, to hear
That was
you.
big.
It's huge. And I think it's just being able to say it out loud. And that's why I think today is really important. I know for a lot of people, maybe on the call, they might have already have some understanding or knowledge of it. But I really, my hope is if you get knowledge today or you already have some, is to really start sharing that because that's where you're going to feel the comfort is realizing you're not the only one.
Right.
Those numbers that I shared, like I said, I think they're probably even higher, but even if they weren't higher, is that's a significant portion of women that have these symptoms.
Mhm.
So it's you're not alone, you're not isolated. You're not a bad mom. But to really ensure that there's hope still there is you need to learn about it and then take action, which we'll get to. But I mean, I think in terms of the postpartum anxiety symptoms, what was the biggest one sounds like the worry about it was the health or the safety of your baby. Was that one of your
Yeah.
bigger?
So for postpartum, I was just, if I feel like you can prepare so much for having a child. You can have your baby shower, you can read all the blogs about the best stroller, best
Hmm.
bottles, if you breastfeeding versus formula feeding, but very few resources out there prepare you for what a huge life change it is that now you're responsible for someone else. Like your whole life, we're pretty selfish, let's be honest. Like
Yes,
we have
so
parents, we
true.
have siblings, we have a spouse and friends, and you care for one another. You have that responsibility. I'm the eldest of three, so I also have that. I always say I'm their second
Hmm.
mother. But you have that bit, but having a child and being responsible for that child, I remember after having as soon as we gave birth to as soon as I gave birth to my eldest, and then it was a traumatic birth, my eldest, and so during the birth we had so many people in the room, I would say, and it's also a learning hospital where I delivered, so
Okay,
there was
so
like double the people. There was I think 15 people in the room. There was a team for the baby, a team for me. My husband was just back there chewing gum. He was like just chewing so loudly. That's my core memory from that time. But
let's remember.
that's what I remember. And I remember as soon as the baby's born and everything is fine, and then everyone leaves. They just leave the
Yes,
room. They leave the room. It's so quiet. Well, not really quiet. The baby's crying, but it's just you, two people who don't know what to do with the baby and a newborn baby. The baby's crying, not latching, doesn't want to take the pacifier. You've also been told not to give the pacifier.
yeah,
Then the baby's still not nursing, but then people are telling you you don't need to formula feed. Like there's so much happening, and you're like, I just have to. And you think it's so easy. You have a baby, you feed, they
yeah.
sleep, you
It should
change
come to
diapers,
us
but it's
naturally.
not.
It's not.
And it was so scared. And he was just crying and crying and crying. And my husband's like, what do we do? And I'm like, I don't know. He's not feeding. And then the nurse came in. She's like, hun, do you want me to give him a pacifier? I'm like, I was told we can't. It's going to cause nipple confusion. And she's like, it's okay. She's like, we give babies in the NICU pacifier. And they were great. My team, my postpartum team and my delivery team were wonderful the whole time. But it was just so much. And then she's like, let me just take him out for a little bit and I'll bring him back just so you can sleep. And then she took him out. And then I was like, what if they just took my child and they
Mm,
swap him with another child?
yeah,
And it was like right then my anxiety was just
yeah,
heightened. And then the baby wasn't and like he wasn't drinking milk. Then they were like, you have to stay in the hospital a little bit longer. Then he had jaundice. They're like, you got to
yeah.
stay.
That's the
We were there for like 4 or 5 days. We had cabin
okay.
fever. And I think that whole experience just everything after that, I was constantly worried that something would happen because I wasn't the best I could be. I would track. I recently found my notebook when I was cleaning up of when I tracked feeds, diaper
Okay.
changes,
Okay.
and it
So
was
you did
like
actually.
pages and pages and pages. And I was like, at first I was like, what is this? And then I realized what it was, but it was for months I did it, for months.
Yeah. And I think
Um,
that's what, really is important is I think people with postpartum anxiety really is, it's like that, the worry, and it's not just any kind of worry, it's worrying about baby's health, baby's
yeah,
future, worry about your ability to be a good mom, worry
that's it.
about how everyone else is going to be with your, like, in terms of, safety and having that control. And I find, I don't know if you had this, a lot of people will share that they avoid certain situations due to anxiety, as whether
Yeah,
it be
I do.
safety things or um, a lot of people, and again, I don't know if you had this or not, but disturbing thoughts that scare you and won't go away.
Yes.
So,
Intrusive
a lot,
thoughts. Yes.
yes. I was gonna say I've had many a client who, when they finally get comfortable enough to share with me around the whole images of my baby being hurt, or if I fall, or what if, there's a knife around or what have you. And it's just like hey, don't worry, if I have a duty to report, if I thought you were at risk of doing something to your child, I would report you. I am not. Like, this is just disturbing, intrusive thoughts that are freaking you out,
Yeah.
that it's a part of your postpartum anxiety. So that's another one that I find that most people are a little bit quieter about sharing, but it is
Oh, yes. That
actually
one people
quite
are quiet
common.
about sharing for
Yeah,
sure.
they're all like, I mean, I know eventually when these people start sharing and they're like, don't worry, if I thought you were going to do something, I would report you. And I know you won't. And the fact that you're so scared about that possibility is why I'm comfortable knowing that this is very low risk for your baby. That nothing's going to happen. But again, I think it's really important to highlight is postpartum anxiety is very intense. And the thoughts for it to kind of reach that level of where it's getting in the way, like from what Hafsa you were talking about, it was intruding in your ability to even rest or to
Yeah.
get help. Like you said, is I don't even trust my own husband, like
Mhm.
holding my baby. So that definitely was disruptive. And some people have those physical symptoms, like what we call panic symptoms. I'm not sure if you had any of those. So like heart rate increase, sometimes trouble breathing, depending on the intensity of the
No, no
worry,
physical
but that can
symptoms.
happen. Okay. So that can also be something, in case anyone's noticed, that is common. It's okay, but it's a part of that postpartum anxiety kind of constellation of symptoms. Is it's not always just in your mind, it's also felt physically, or tension. So that, tense neck, shoulder, which
Yes.
again, you're already postpartum, you're already sore. But if you add in the tenseness related to the worry, it often, people will complain about just needing that, feeling it particularly in their neck and shoulders. Other people will have stomach issues based on how
Right.
intense the anxiety is. But these are just some common symptoms that, in case you or somebody you know is having, is something that, you'd want to keep an eye on for sure.
So, how do you know if it's just the baby blues or post something more? Because sometimes when you talk
Yeah.
about things and you start saying like, "Oh, I'm so nervous." I remember even with my third, I would be like, "I need to go for a non-stress test. I don't know if something is happening or something's not happening." And my mom said, "This is your third baby. Like you should know now what's happening and what's not happening." But I was so nervous. How do you know what's just a normal fear and normal anxiety or anxious thought, as opposed to actual full-blown PPA or PPD?
Yeah. And I think for me, the biggest thing when it comes to what we talk about baby blues, I think people assume baby blues last for months. It doesn't. Stereotypically, it lasts for a few weeks post baby.
Okay.
And when it comes to postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, I'm sure you would agree, it lasts longer. It's
Mhm.
longer in terms of how long the symptoms are present. And it's just more intense, meaning the baby blues often don't necessarily get in the way of your functioning themselves. You notice them, you see them, you might be a bit more teary, your sleep is more disrupted. But when it comes to postpartum depression and anxiety, and even just the anxiety symptoms we talked about, they're next level. They're not, "Oh, everybody has those." I'm like, no, they don't. This is
Okay.
this is more. And for me, the bigger thing is that if it gets in the way of your functioning, that's when I would say is that's what makes it stand out. And it's often missed, to be honest with you, because again, like you said yourself, is most people are like, this is common, this is normal, it'll get better. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, given that there is all these changes in sleep patterns, focus, energy, body weight, hormones, it's like, not, it doesn't always, most often than not, to be honest, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety doesn't always lift naturally itself by itself, where baby blues goes away on its own. It's like this time period that happens for a couple of weeks after baby and it goes away. So I also would say is if you're in that I'm not really sure phase, is if it lasts longer than a couple of weeks, I think it's time for people to reach out. And again, I mean, did you have any symptoms or did you notice anything for you for postpartum depression? Or I don't know if you've heard from any of your friends that might have struggled, but they're more intense than the baby blues,
Right.
right?
So
So I
I
mean,
didn't have postpartum depression, but I did notice with a few friends. I feel like once you start learning about things and you become more aware, like
yes,
you're so right. Like it's a matter of knowing things to help others as well. Like I
yes,
feel like I know my triggers. I feel like I know what my triggers were for um full-blown postpartum anxiety with both my first and third.
hmm
That when I know a friend has gone through something similar, right away I'm that person who is checking in a little bit more,
good,
offering them my support when I can because I know. And also
yes,
because I've learned a little bit more about postpartum depression. So I look for those triggers, even whether it's for postpartum depression. I know the importance of having comfort or like with the thing with anxiety and postpartum depression is that you don't really want other people around your baby, but at the same time, depression can
it
also
is.
set in when you're all alone. And a lot of new moms are like your spouse. My spouse only took 2 days off after having the kids. So it's like he had to
Yes,
go back to work. And I didn't have that depression, but it was a sad time. Motherhood can be so lonely. That's another thing that I think,
yes,
you see like on TikTok and Instagram, the moms on their mat leaves and like going for lunch all the time and stuff. But what about the right afterwards when you're all by yourself with just a baby and you don't want to sleep because the baby might need you and you don't want to eat and or you're recovering from a
yes.
C-section and there's just so much there that I think being that supportive person and learning about it even if you haven't gone through it, I think learning about it and trying to be that village for others is so paramount.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's also important because I think when we think of postpartum depression or depression in general, we think of, well, they're just really sad. And it's like it is so much more than that. And I think it is that, listen, we're a collectivist community-based culture, which I love, which is, something we should be happy about, which means it
Right.
comes with this whole we should try to be a community and be there for each other. So I think it's even if people here aren't struggling with this themselves, which is great, or you haven't in the past, is like Hafsa said, is for those around you, because I think we need everyone to be aware. So it's not always just sadness. It really is like just having strong feelings of being overwhelmed, like you can't handle being a mom, or that guilt that your baby deserves better, that you're not a good mom, right? So it really becomes this very heavy thing that's not just here and there, it's constant. A common one, and I know that freaks us out as new moms, is you don't feel bonded to your baby.
Mhm.
That there's not that, we always hear is that you're going to have this immediate connection, immediate joy. And a lot of moms with postpartum depression do not feel bonded to their baby. And that can really freak people out. And I think it's that this is not, uncommon. This is part of postpartum depression. Um, and that you feel angry and irritated. It's not just sadness. Again, that's the
Mhm.
whole stereotype of it is like you have no patience, everything might annoy you, particularly your partner, even the baby, which I know it makes us feel even more guilty. It's like, how can I feel resentment towards my baby and feel
Right.
irritated? It's like, yeah, because I mean, this is the source of the disruption, to put it bluntly and clearly. But again, like I said, there's so much stigma and shame that it is really important to realize is it's not just, yes, there is that sadness that often women will talk about just to the depths of their soul, like it's just, I feel so sad, I feel hopeless. Um, Often women will share with me that they don't either it's I can't get myself to eat, which especially if you're nursing is super important. But also the opposite is that's the only way I feel kind of like okay is if I just kind of keep eating and snacking, right? Which also isn't a great solution. Um, One of the things that I always look for and I wanted to share is we know that new moms always have disrupted sleep. It's part
Mhm.
of part of unfortunately the territory of being a new parent. Um, But what I always ask for my new moms when they're my clients is like, okay, so like, are you still having problems with sleep even though your baby's sleeping and everything's like, you could sleep?
Right.
Because it is really important. It's not just, well, of course I have problems with sleep. I'm a new mom. It's like, well, is it because of the baby? Like, what's going on here? And sometimes I'll often hear is actually my baby's pretty good at sleeping. He or she isn't the issue. I'm
Right.
just either, having issue there. So it's something just to keep in mind, not to just assume that the stereotypical symptoms, is because of being a new mom. It's like, no, the memory is an important one. Concentration. Yes, as a new mom, it's hard to focus. It's that next level, particularly if you've been like for Hafsa, like you kind of mentioned, is it wasn't like it just happened with one of your pregnancies. You're like third time it happened. So you have a sense of how you were probably second pregnancy and
Yep.
knowing that, hey, I wasn't this scatterbrained during my second. What's going on? Is this more than should be expected? Because it is important because if your concentration is that bad that you might be missing things and you are responsible for a child is again, it's a sign that you might need to get some help, right? And another big one, which again, I think is not talked about particularly enough in our community, is the whole you might be having thoughts of, I just want to run away and leave my family behind. And even taking it to the next level, which is, and you might have had thoughts of ending your life. Again, these are things that it's important we talk about suicide. Just because you talk about it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it is important if you're having any of those type of thoughts or feelings is number one, step one is just being able to say it out loud and know that that means that you need to get help. But also, that doesn't mean you're a bad mom if you have those thoughts, right? You're not acting on the thoughts. So let's try to do something about that before we get to that point where, you might need to actually feel the need to do something.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, I just wanted to put that out there as postpartum depression isn't just the whole, you're sad all the time and you don't want to do anything. It's a lot more. And that kind of that sadness is more of a baby blues thing. Like when it comes to postpartum depression, it's a lot more symptoms there. But
Okay.
yeah.
Um, we talked about how common it is and how often women, new moms do go through it. But why do some women struggle with postpartum depression or prenatal depression or postpartum anxiety? Like, why do some women get it and not others? Like, is
Yeah,
there
that's a hard one.
precursors?
Yeah. And it's a hard one, right? Because I think we always want to know why, right? Is it something we did? And it's honestly, it's a combination of factors. For some people, sleep deprivation is a trigger for mood difficulties more than the average, right? In general, sleep disruption can trigger mood problems in baby or not. But some people are just more sensitive to that in terms of bringing things on. Uh, Obviously, it goes without saying when you're a new mom, there are major changes in your roles, expectations, relationships. Um, but for some moms, there's more changes in there than there are for others, right? Some women have a good, handle of those things and they're privileged enough to have some things in place. Not all do. So it can be even just a factor of how much of a change has happened pre-baby versus post-baby. Um, I know for a lot of particularly first-time moms, maybe pre-baby, there wasn't a big emphasis on coping skills because it was like, I'm fine, I'm doing okay. Um, and generally, if you're not that great at coping skills from before, it's even harder to kind of implement coping skills when you have a baby. If you're not already in the practice of it. So it is really important that some of these moms don't already have their go-to coping skills. They don't have that in place. Again, the hormone change is a big thing that for some new moms, it's more of a trigger.
Okay.
And I guess I would say is something you've already mentioned in terms of risk factors is if you have a history of depression or anxiety at the previous pregnancy, you're more likely to have it for another one. So just something to keep in mind that I know it'd be amazing if it was one and done. It's not. If you have a previous history of depression, so pre-pregnancy, pre-children, you're more likely to. That's generally when family doctors might start kind of monitoring to kind of say,
Okay.
hey, you have a history, we've treated you for depression before. We're going to
Right.
keep an extra eye on you. And I would say the same as if you have a previous history of depression, make sure there's a plan in place, right? Because you are more likely, and as well as if your family history of depression. So if your mom had depression, your dad, your sister, you are more likely to. So these are just some things to keep in mind is that yes, some women are more likely to have postpartum depression or anxiety than others, but that doesn't mean it's a 100% chance or that nothing can be done about these higher risks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that um women, so with both My first and my third, my births were very traumatic.
Mm.
I think that women who experience trauma, whether it's through miscarriages or pregnancy loss or stillborns or any trauma during a pregnancy, sets them up for being more anxious or depressed.
Well, I mean, I would say this is that, when you have trauma, um, so again, for my clinical practice, my focus is on trauma. And I always tell people you might have something traumatic. What results from it could either be something like post-traumatic stress disorder, which again, I've seen a lot of new moms that have that as a result of whether it be horrible delivery stories or, stillborn miscarriages, what have you. Whereas others might have that same thing, but it leads to depression. Where others might have that, and it leads to more of a general anxiety, kind of like what you've described, is that it might not come across as a post traumatic stress disorder. Um, but yes, you are more likely to, right? What we say about when it comes to even trauma, the closer you are to the traumatic event in proximity and how much it impacts you, the more likely you are to actually have a reaction. And you can't get any closer than
Right.
giving birth, right?
Right.
Like you can't be any closer to that traumatic event than that. And I think it is really important to keep in mind that if you've had a traumatic experience during childbirth or during your pregnancy, is you need to have, your people around you should know, and your family and your friends, is that you're a higher risk. So let's keep an eye on, right? Those coping skills that I talked about, and we'll get into what can I do to help, is they're going to be more important because it doesn't mean that 100% something's going to happen, but it really does mean is you need to be more aware, it is more likely to happen. So let's do something about it. Because to me, it is really important that people feel that hope, that it's
Right.
not just it's going to be horrible, I'm going to go into a downward spiral, is that there is help out there, there is hope. And it really gets to is if you can't do something about it, make sure the people around you that are in your life, your healthcare providers, your partner, your family, your friends, how can they help you if you're not able to help yourself?
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, um, when should someone speak with a professional? I know that's a very hard one for a
I
lot
know,
of
but
people.
I'll be honest, I'm probably more than the average person. I'm more likely to say is I'm a big believer in if you're thinking about it, then seek out for help, to be honest. To me, it's early intervention is so important when it comes to physical conditions. It's equally important when it comes to psychological and mental health conditions. The earlier you intervene, the more likely you're going to see a quicker response to whatever the intervention might be. So, like, Hafsa, you mentioned something. It can be medication, it can be therapy, it can be both. It can just be, coming up with a coping plan yourself with your family, right? So, I'm a big believer in if you feel like there's something going on, reach out, start with your family doctor, right? They are trained and equipped to know to look out for these things. But as a rule, what I usually say to people is if it's getting in the way of your functioning in any way, get help. So if you're unsure if it's, do I need to? I'm like, well, is it getting in the way of you enjoying time with your baby? Yes. Okay. So then I would say err on the side of caution, because we have this perception that having a baby is such a happy time. And as Hafsa, you mentioned, it's like, well, I
Yeah.
wanted that baby out of me right away at 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And that creates barriers to getting help, right? It's like this whole something's wrong with me, people are going to judge me. And there's a lot of stigma and shame still with postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And I would just say is we'll start with people that you can trust. So hopefully a healthcare provider is a good person to start with. It is really important you get the help because as much as I'm like, there's treatment, it's effective, and we'll get into, I'm sure, how effective it is. But if you leave it prolonged and untreated, it really can be quite disruptive. So it's not just disruptive for you as a mom for your health, but it can disrupt your family relationships, your marriage, and the mother-child relationship, which is really important. And what studies find is that if a mother's postpartum depression and anxiety is carries on longer, it can really get in the way of that child's development. So there's
Right.
actual practical implications. So again, that's why I go back to the whole is it's better to err on the side of caution in terms of reaching out for help. I'm sure your doctor would appreciate it. And if they don't, if your healthcare provider is not receptive, and we all have had that.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in advocating or finding somebody else then. And I know that sucks, especially if you're in Ontario in certain places. It can be hard finding a healthcare provider, family doctor is go to walk-in clinic, go to every province, to my knowledge, has things set up for postpartum as well as for pregnant women. Is do a quick Google for where you are because it is really important. This is why these services have been put into place across Canada, is that it is important. So in case you hit a roadblock, so if family doctor's not receptive to it, they dismiss you, they don't think it's worth intervening, and you still think something's off, please try again because it is important. Um, and the one thing I'm going to say, and I know we're really talking about postpartum depression and anxiety, but there's something called postpartum psychosis, and I don't know if you've heard of
Right.
it, I've said, but I think sometimes we might hear about it when things are pretty bad in the news, things like that. This is very rare. It's about, I think it's about like 1 in every 1,000 moms. So it's very rare, but it's a sudden onset of psychotic symptoms after childbirth. So psychotic symptoms are hearing or seeing things that aren't really there, or having really unusual or paranoid beliefs and thoughts. If that happens to you or somebody that you know, you have to seek medical attention immediately. It's pretty serious. There is treatment, so I don't want anyone to feel that this is a hopeless situation, but it definitely isn't a let's wait and see those couple of weeks. It definitely is please seek immediate attention. It's something that can have more severe outcomes, severe complications. So it really is important that we are on top of these things. Again, knowledge is power. But the next step is, okay, doing something with that knowledge, which again is part of our faith, right? Is that you have to kind of implement the things that you learn, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had anything, have said that you found that did help you when you were going through it, in terms of how did you cope? How did you cope with the anxiety? I know you said I shared it with my, my healthcare team, and that was helpful. But I guess what else did you find helpful, or looking back, might you have found helpful?
So I think that I'm a chatty person. I talk quite
Okay,
a bit. So I'm always looking. I think that I tend to talk a lot about my issues as well, like not just with my sister or my spouse, but I will talk about it because I want to learn from other people's experiences as well. And I think a lot of people will share their stories once you start talking about it. Um, and what I found that besides talking to my healthcare team about it, and I think that because I talked to my OB about it, and she must have made a note or something because after I delivered my child, who is now mashallah 3 years old, but
that's
the doctor, the chief on the chief of surgery, I guess, he called me the day after because, like I said, it was a very, very traumatic birth. It could have ended horribly. Alhamdulillah, it didn't. But that alone was like, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I knew something bad was going to happen, and something bad almost very
yeah,
close did happen. And he called me the next day after I went home, and I thought it was so strange. Like, I have delivered at the hospital before. No one's ever called me before. And he spoke with me for 10 minutes, just telling me that everything will be fine. And he knows that it was a very traumatic incident. And he wanted me to say that, like, there was no way that they would have let anything happen, that his
yeah.
team and him. So someone must have left a note for him because this has never happened. And I have delivered
Yes,
in that exact same hospital two other times before. But the fact that he took time out of his very, very busy day to give me a call and to reassure me and tell me that I should talk to someone if I am stressed and if I don't have anyone to call back to the hospital and they will put me in touch with a therapist or someone to connect with. And I remember crying on that phone call because it was like he just knew I needed someone to tell me it was going to be
see,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that that kind of made sure that I continued to do my therapy sessions. And I know therapy is not always accessible. That's why at Sakina we offer free mental health therapy for those who need it. I think even a lot of clinics offer at a scale, they have it at a scale and like private benefits. But I do can't stress it enough that talking to someone who's not necessarily family, having a therapist who's very unbiased, who's there just to listen and help you, is something that we shouldn't take for granted. Like, it's something that if it's accessible for us, to us, I think it's so important to do, because not even just for whether it's postpartum or prenatal anxiety, but so many other issues in life as well. I'm a big mental health advocate. I tell everyone and their moms to get therapy because I think it's so important.
Yes.
But something else that really helped me cope was I knew that I had the postpartum anxiety with my first. So going into my third pregnancy and experiencing it, I told my mom that I needed her for my third, like, no matter what. And it was very difficult. She had to help my sister with her children as well. And it was a very difficult time. But I said, listen, I need it. Whenever you can, I need you
Yes.
here because I only have you. And I'm like, you're my support system. My sister has very young children. Otherwise, I know she'd be there in a heartbeat. Her youngest was just turning 1. And my mom said that she'll do what she can. So some weekends she spent the weekend. And it was just
Okay.
nice having the only other person I really fully trusted with my babies during my postpartum anxiety was my mom.
Okay.
Even after, and we had delivered in COVID. So at
Okay.
that
So
time,
that's
you
a
weren't
whole
allowed
other layer.
visitors, all the stuff. And I remember
Yes.
crying to the nurses saying, I just need my mom. Like, after
Yeah.
I had
Right.
delivered and stuff, and she's like, "We'll make it happen." And they're like, "Your husband
Okay.
has to leave. You're only allowed one person. It's a loophole." But they did it for me, and I can't thank them enough because I just needed to see my mom at that time.
Yes.
And I think that I created like a plan for myself
I
with
was just gonna
therapy,
say,
with my
I
mom
pick up.
coming over. So I was like, okay, I'm setting myself up for success here. And I'm a planner by nature. So I think that truly helped me. And during my prenatal, I it became a little obsessive with how I prayed and how often I prayed, but I did find comfort in praying. And
Okay.
I think that that's something that it's my foundations of
Yeah.
like
No.
growing up with a very conservative and religious family where my dad, his main source of comfort was always the Quran. And he says there's no other place to ask for God's help than when you're in sajda. Like, that's just things my dad says every day. And I think that I really did find some comfort in praying. So pairing
Yeah.
your dean and your therapy, I think it was, you got to trust in God, but tie your
Like a
camel. I'm wearing
combination.
my crew neck right
Yes.
now, but I think it was so important, and it did give me peace
Okay.
above
Yeah.
anything
And
else.
I think that's
Yeah.
what's really important, I think, for people is like you just said, it sounds like you kind of developed a plan, right?
Yes.
And I think almost like, and it sounds to me like you did this for your third because of what happened with the first. And I guess I would say is if there are any new moms to be on the call or know anyone is I think everyone should make a plan for postpartum because most people don't. They plan for the
Mhm.
delivery and they don't plan for postpartum. And maybe, inshallah, you don't need it, but I think it's important to have a plan in place. So I think some of the stuff that Hafsa mentioned, I think is important. Number one, reducing stress where possible. And I think a lot of the things you put on a plan might seem obvious, but I will tell you as a mom of 3 is when you're in it, if you don't have it prompted in front of you, you don't remember to do these things. So it
Yeah.
is reducing stress when possible, getting help with tasks, baby care, like you said, with your mom, and otherwise. I'm a big believer in if you can outsource anything or get help or have,
Yes.
for friends offering to drop
Outsource.
off food,
Take it.
please accept it. And I know it's something I still work on is that people are offering to help. We're often, yes, we're a collectivist culture, but we often are like, no, no, it's okay. Don't worry. I got it. It's
Yeah.
like, you don't got it. Accept it. It is important that you get, rest periods from the baby, which again, building that in, whether it be with your partner or with family, if you can outsource and even financially have somebody come in, um, getting outside with your baby by all means. And it's amazing if you're, it's depending on the time of the year, but like to go for a walk, grabbing a coffee. I would sometimes go like a walk through Home Sense, you know, with my
Yes.
stroller because I can't just stay home and it's too complicated to try to coordinate with somebody. So let me do this. I think it's really important if people try out mindfulness, like using an app. So the Ruh app is one that people can try out, which I would recommend, and something most new moms don't have the bandwidth to really do anything on their own, but listening to something recorded is really helpful.
Hmm.
Um, Try to move your body. So I started doing at some point 5 minute stretches. I went on YouTube, search 5 minutes. I'm like, you know what? I can do 5 minutes.
Right.
And it really is something that really is important. It's should really be highlighted is it's important to move the basics for me when it comes to working with moms is the eating and the drinking, moving your body, and sleep. Sleep is hard with new moms, but
Hmm.
I think it's a can you move your body a bit? Connecting with other new moms. So as Hafsa mentioned, there's this period of you just feel isolated, and maybe you're not able to connect with your friends depending on stage of life where they live. If you're here in Ontario, and I'm sure there's in other provinces, I would go to the Ontario Early Years Center. I know it's still there. They do groups with for children of that age. So you're taking your baby, you're connecting with other moms, you're doing something, getting out of the house, and they have services there as well if you need anything more additional. So I think it's really an important resource. Is if you need anything, I know with one of my children, they were language delayed. Actually, two of mine were language delayed, so I had them assessed through the early year center. So it was a good resource for me to ask questions because even though it was my second and third child, I didn't have all the answers. And Google isn't always the best place to get all of them. So it's important to really tap into resources that are there. I can't underscore enough, like how Hafsa said, is the local public health units, the hospitals, um, you're not alone. They know the new moms can struggle. So if you don't have access to insurance, and if, for whatever reason, you're not comfortable reaching out to us at Sakina for services, is reach out to where you delivered and see. They will have some at least short-term services in place. It is really important that you try to connect with your partner. And I hope we get a chance. I know we're running out of time. Is your partner is really important through all of this, right? So it is important with and without your baby having some of that time because there has to be some of that more outside of just you being a mom. And I know that's hard to do when you're in that new mom stages, but you are your own person as well. Um, but again, there's lots of things to do, but I would just really underscore is give yourself some time to think about and maybe problem solve with your partner or a good friend is what can I put on my coping plan? What can help me through this? Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I know we're running low on time, so I don't know if we will have time to talk about what goes on with your partner during all of this, or if we want to skip to.
No, I think that's actually a great topic that we do need to quickly cover, hopefully.
Yes.
But partners and I guess also fathers can also suffer from the symptoms
Yes.
of PD and PPA.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one because I know for me, uh, full disclosure, even though I'm a therapist, I didn't know back when, I mean, my kids are a bit older and stuff. I had no idea that, fathers could also develop PPD, PPA, and I think it's important that we're aware of that. And it's not just, the odd husband will 10% of men show signs of depression from first trimester of the wife's pregnancy through postpartum. So it's
Mhm.
not just postpartum, it's from pregnancy onwards. 10% of partners show this. So that's pretty big. Studies also show that there's actually a physical change happening in men's hormones. So this is not just in their head, right? This is actually physiological changes that happen. And this one really stood out to me is if you have PPD, if you have postpartum depression, half of those husbands, partners are also have PPD themselves. So that's really important. It's really important because if both parents have depression, it can have really serious consequences for their marriage as well as their children. So it is really important that we keep an eye on, so like I said, we want to keep an eye on the women in our lives. We also want to keep an eye on the men, right? They have higher rates of stigma. Their symptoms might be a bit different. They might be a bit more irritable and agitated. You might notice that they're distancing themselves from their partner and the baby. They might be working more. They might seem more, withdrawn and pulled back from the family and doing things. They might actually have comments that they're feeling worthless. Um, and again, like I said, is if their partner, their wife is suffering from postpartum depression, it's something you should really keep an eye on even more because, like I said, is there is treatment out there for men as well, but they're less likely to get it. So it is really important. Um, and I guess the last bit around I think is really important is this: what's going to happen? Is this going to last forever?
Yeah.
Is full recovery is very common if you get help. And I'm going to say that again. If you get help, full recovery is very common. It might take a few weeks, maybe a few months, but this is not years we're talking about. Full recovery can happen within weeks to maybe a couple of months. Um, it might be that some of the coping strategies that we kind of touched on might become lifelong habits that you might need to kind of always be on top of your sleep. You might need to be on top of how you eat, moving your body. That might need to be a lifelong habit. But I'm a big believer in it's a good thing. Um, and it is just, again, like I says, today is important. Is just we want to really have these conversations so you can take away some of that guilt and the heaviness and realize you're not alone. And step one is really getting that help. Yeah, so I don't know if we have questions in the
We
chat
have
or
so
not.
many questions.
All right. They're in the chat as well, and also on the screen. Oh yes, that's right. We have this new technology that I'm
Yes.
still behind on. I don't know if we can, maybe I can make this a spotlight or do we not want to do that?
Let me know if you can.
Okay, see. Let me see. I can maybe take us off of spotlight, maybe. Maybe do that so people can see the screen and stop looking at us. No, I cannot remove. Yeah, okay. Well, it's at least looking at you. I
Okay.
can't see the questions because it's too small of a font, so you might have to read them out to me from from the.
Let's see. I think I can click on questions. Send. And you can see it. Okay, so how do I get my family to believe me and
Hmm.
not that it's just in my head?
I honestly think sometimes, and I know it's sad and it's unfortunate, is that sometimes we have families that don't really get it. And I know it's not often for lack of trying or understanding, is that does not mean you can't get help, even if your family doesn't get it. My hope is that there might be someone in your family that maybe is more, can be your person. And it
Mhm.
might not be your partner. And I know that sucks. And I know that's difficult. But I think if we get stuck on the whole, but it should be like this, it should be my husband or it should be my mom, it should be my sister, is, maybe it's your cousin that gets it and can be that person for you. So I think we do sometimes need to change around the whole belief that my family is my support system. They're there for me. Is sometimes it's your chosen family. I'm a big
Yes.
believer in that. The older I'm getting, I'm older than probably a lot of people on the call, is chosen family is so important, is being able to reach out to them and letting them know is, hey, you know what, my family doesn't get it. I was wondering if you can kind of help me a little bit with this and come up with some of that. And don't allow that just because your family doesn't believe you doesn't mean you can't access help, right? So just making sure that don't let that be a roadblock for you accessing more professional help.
You need to
Yeah.
have an official diagnosis from a medical professional to seek professional help.
No. As someone who, I mean, as a registered psychotherapist, I'm not, legally allowed to give official diagnoses. I have lots of clients that have postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. You don't need to have that. I'm a big believer, and as a lot of mental health professionals are, often people are preoccupied with, I need the diagnoses. It's like, for what reason? Unless it's for, I don't know, maybe you need it for some type of documentation or you're applying for something, is more importantly is what are your symptoms and how can we work with them? Right? So I think we sometimes want that label. I don't know that it's always necessary.
That's a good question, though, to ask. I feel
Yeah,
like
no, it is.
we're
And I
so
think a
caught
lot of
up on
people
it.
like, and I hear that a lot when it comes to a lot of mental health issues, whether it be ADHD or PTSD, don't I need that? And it's like, no, you can access help. You can have medication. Doctors aren't preoccupied with diagnosis either anymore. It's like, oh, you have symptoms of postpartum. I would
Yeah.
recommend you take a bit of medication. It doesn't mean you only take medication or you only get therapy when you meet clinical criterion for postpartum depression.
Okay. So what does professional support look like?
Mm. And like we kind of touched on a bit, I mean,
Yeah.
Hafsa, I mean, like she said, is professional support can look like meeting with a therapist one-on-one. So having regular sessions. Professional support can also look like going to some member of your healthcare team, whether it be nurse practitioner, family doctor, your OB. They might prescribe you some medication. Again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm just going to put this plug in here, as I know particularly women who are pregnant or are nursing or postpartum, they get very uncomfortable with the idea of medication.
Yeah.
Antidepressants are one of the most prescribed classes of medication. They've been prescribed for decades. There's a lot of research out there. So I would say make sure you ask your questions around, is this medication, has it been deemed safe if I'm nursing? Is it been deemed safe during pregnancy? Ask those questions, because the one good thing when it comes to antidepressants is that there's a lot of them. So if there isn't that much evidence around one of them, ask your doctor for another one.
Right.
So please, but do that research before you say no. I find that often people will have this knee-jerk reaction to no medication, is ask, because sometimes, honestly, the risks outweigh um, the benefits of not taking medication, right? So therapy sometimes isn't enough only. So yes, so the two main professional supports are therapy and medication, but there's a lot of more less professional supports, whether it be attending groups, group sessions, a new mommy and baby group. Those are
Right.
often great places. There are conversations that are happening. You're with people who are also in the same stage as you, and that can really be a good support to have.
Okay. What is perinatal anxiety in a Muslim or South Asian household? For example, what are some challenges and how can you get through them? What does support look like?
What do you think, Hafsa? I don't know, because I know you're from a South Asian household. So what were some challenges that you might have had with the perinatal
I
anxiety?
think with a lot of in our communities, whether it's Muslim or the South Asian side of things, but talking about mental health struggles is still very much frowned upon. I think it's still something that people tend to brush under the rug, especially the older generations, I want to say. Like when I
Yes.
talk about therapy, my mom's not on this call, so I can talk about it more openly. But when I talk about therapy and why I need it, my mom has straight up said, just talk to me. I'm here for you. Um,
Yes.
and my dad says, are you praying properly? Are you praying on time? Did you pray your Quran? Like, are you doing this and XYZ? Like, are you doing your dhikr? And are you making sure that you're praying with khushu? And like, it comes down to like maybe your iman's not strong enough. And I think that that is
Mm,
um something that often deters us from talking about our struggles, whether it's anxiety or depression in a postpartum or prenatal sense. And I think that is something that is a challenge,
yes. And
especially if your parents are your support system as well to get them on
yes.
board with helping you. And I think that one thing that has helped me is just telling my mom that basically I just told her my doctor agrees that I have it. And I think that there's something else that South Asians love is that's doctors. And so they will
Yeah.
listen when it's a professional saying
Yes.
it rather than just myself. And I think that I have just had to really spend some time talking to my parents about it and also just telling them stories of other people who have suffered through it and gone through it. And like I think um it's a matter, I think a lot of it just comes down to spreading more awareness, and I think that really helps.
Yes.
And I would love it if more masjids also became on board with it. I talked
Yes.
about it in my halqa sessions. Like I think there's more of ways of that we can spread awareness and talk about it. But I think
Yeah.
that's
And I think it's an important point you brought up there is we have a lot more in the Muslim and South Asian households, it's called spiritual bypassing. It's like inshallah, this is going to get better. You just got to pray more. You got to do more. We assume there's always just an exclusively religious answer to it. And it goes back to the whole, you got to tie your camel too.
yeah.
By all means, studies show that, praying, that spiritual connection is an important indicator of recovery.
Yes.
However, there's more to it, right? And I also would just add in, like you said, is how do we, what can we do with some of these things? And similar to the previous question is sometimes you don't need to share some of these things with your family. And I know that's
Yeah,
hard,
I
but
know.
I'm not asking you to lie, but I'm just like, if you know it's not gonna be well received and you don't have the bandwidth to have to justify and explain it, is they don't need to know. As long as you get help and you're
Yep,
getting it, I think that's really important.
I agree. Okay, I know I'm just being conscious of time, so
Yeah, because
maybe
I know in the chat, I also wanted to make sure, because I know the people in the
yes.
chat also, I know this whole, um, maybe I jump to that question for a second. Did you ever go through denial of having depression? I find if my spouse or in-laws wonder if I'm sad or depressed, my immediate answer is no, defensively. And I still feel I'm not depressed, but I know my responses are more intense and more heightened than pre-pregnancy. So there has to be something that I'm going through. And I think that's really important, is realizing that we get defensive because there is still also something, to me, that's a red flag that goes up, or a yellow flag, is why are you being so defensive? Is there
Right.
a reason to be, versus I know I'm good, thank you for asking. Is there something that is actually happening? And what does that mean if there is? Because as much as I'm talking about the stigma and shame in the community, both Hafsa and I have talked about that, we still have our own issues with this, right? It's
Yes.
still uncomfortable to feel, no, I'm good. Why would you think I'm depressed? It's normal. It's just checking in, right? Like if your spouse and your in-laws are both noticing it and checking in, I would just say is maybe spend a little time just reflecting a little bit. Is there something happening? What are they noticing? I guess try to do it with a bit more, maybe do it later on, maybe a couple hours later when you don't feel as, defensive, is checking in. Is there a big difference going on? Is it worthwhile checking on and monitoring? I don't know if that helps with that
Yeah.
one.
Let's
How
do a
can
few more.
spouses? Yeah.
Spouses. How can
Yeah,
spouses and partners be more supportive?
and I think that's something we probably didn't talk much about. And it might seem obvious, but I really think it is your spouse needs to be part of that plan. And I
Yeah.
know that's something I talked about, is having that plan in place, is they need to be part of it. It's not just a plan just for you, is how can they support you? And that's different for different people, right? So what Hafsa might have needed might be different than what I would have needed from my spouse, right? So for me, it really is things like, if I was exclusively breastfeeding, is okay, so you can't give a bottle in the night, but I don't have the bandwidth. So you know what? You gotta get up to do the diaper changes and change anything that needs to happen. And then
Yes.
you pass me the baby just to nurse and then you put back, right?
Yes.
That might be a discussion. I know my husband did a lot of did the bathing of the baby. Not something I didn't do. I had my own anxiety about bathing the baby. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it was something he took on. And it was something that allowed me to have a bit of that break anyway. So I think it is trying to find out what works for you, is what
Yeah.
do you need from your spouse? Listen, they might not be good at cooking. They might not be able to step up in that way, but hey, can they figure out? I know I've had a client say, I'm like, well, give it to your spouse to find a local auntie to do home deliveries for food, right?
Yeah.
Let him take that on, right? Let him at least take that mental load from you of what food is
Yes.
going to
So
look
big.
like. As long as it's on him, he has to pay for it. He has to arrange delivery if he can't. Allow him to do it his way though, but this is his responsibility.
I love that.
So I think it is important, but also revisit it. So as much as I said, come up with a plan, please revisit your plan. Your plan is a hypothetical plan based on, let's see how things go. It might not go as planned. Please revisit. That's the biggest thing I find. I have clients that come up with a plan and then I'm like, did you look at your plan again? Did you revisit it? Did you tweak it? Because that's often needed, right? So I would say is please come up with a plan with your spouse, involve them in it. I know it feels like you're telling them what to do, but it really is, they don't know. You don't know what's going on. They
You have to
definitely don't know
communicate
what's
for
going on.
sure.
So it is, can you help me with this plan? What can you do? And be able to say, can you take the mental load of meals from me or mental load of cleaning from me? If he ends up outsourcing, gets your mom to come over with the food, not your business. Allow yourself to kind of give that up
That's
to
a
him.
hard one to do too, though. That's
It,
a
it
whole
is.
different
I'm not gonna.
webinar on the
Yes, it
mental
is.
load and
It's a whole other thing, but I would say is until you can tell, I always say to my clients, until you come to me and say, well, there was no food, until they actually fail at it, don't, you have to really allow people to
yeah.
try and let them have an opportunity to, and then we can talk if we need to adjust things.
I know we talked about intrusive thoughts, but how do we get
Yes.
rid of them?
I'm going to say it's going to be hard to do that if it's just yourself. To be honest, that's usually when I would say you need to get help. But number one, I would say is trying to push them away is not helpful. So the elephant in the room. Okay, I'm not going to think about the images of my baby
Yeah.
getting hurt. I don't think that really helps. It's allowing it to be present and really being able to talk back to that,
Okay.
right? So being able to kind of sit with it and it's like, just because I think it doesn't mean it's true. And being able to maybe, if you can, as part of your coping plan, come up with some coping statements. I'm a big believer in having kind of
Yes.
taglines or
That's what
maybe
my
sticky
therapist said
notes that you
too.
have. Okay. Yeah, I'm a big
That's
believer in put a
great.
sticky note, have it on your home screen. What can you say to yourself if you have these intrusive thoughts that do help you? So that's what I would say in a nutshell.
Does PPD or PPA peak at a certain period after birth? For example,
Generally happens in the first few weeks.
okay.
But there can be a delay, and I think that's part of the misconception, right? Is that, oh, it only happens, how am I getting symptoms? And I'm at month 4. It's characterized officially the diagnosis in that anytime in that first year, right? So it can happen. It's just more commonly in the first few weeks that it onsets and peaks. But don't be surprised if you're like, that's 6 months in and now I'm feeling it. It can happen.
Okay. When does PPA, PPD lead to postpartum psychosis? I want to say they're completely separate,
Yes,
correct?
I was just going to say that they're different. It's not that one leads to the other. They're separate diagnoses.
Okay.
Um, Perhaps there's some overlap between postpartum psychosis and postpartum depression. Um, Again, I'm going to say if you have any concerns about you having postpartum psychosis, I would say definitely, check in with a healthcare professional because it is a bit more significant, but they're different. So it's not just, I have depression, oh
One
my
won't
God,
lead
I'm
to the
having a good
other.
psychosis. Yes, it's not
Okay.
this type of scenario.
Okay. And there was one other question that was in the chat, but what are some coping strategies to plan for? I know we talked about like just making sure that you can check off your self-care boxes, and self-care obviously looks different when you're postpartum, but making sure you're eating, making sure
Yes,
you're resting, like and moving are
yes.
the three
And I
things
think just
that we should plan for.
thinking outside the box. So I know for me, I'm somebody who likes to read. I wasn't able to do that in my postpartum period. I had no, bandwidth to do that, to actually focus on things. So whether it be think ahead and what show might I be able to watch that actually brings me a little bit of joy. Reruns of I had kids a while ago. I watched reruns of The Office, I think, during, when I was up late at night nursing. So it
Mhm.
wasn't just sitting there and feeling horrible.
And
It
your
was, okay,
thoughts,
what can
yeah.
I do? Exactly. And then later on, I started, podcasts or, audiobooks and just trying to think outside the box. And if it's, maybe phone calls or whatever it is think of things that you may not be doing right now, but what can you do? Right. So I think that's part of the coping strategies to plan for is just sitting there when your baby is crying or what have you is it doesn't feel good. So if you can kind of make it a little bit better, whether it be my baby's crying regardless, I'm gonna go for a walk. Like to try to come up with a plan um, with different strategies that you can try different things because you're not going to have the ability to kind of come up with it on the spot, I'm sure.
Sure. Okay.
But
That brings us to the end of our event.
yeah, so sorry, I know we went over time, but I really, wanted to make sure that everyone had a
Same.
chance to
I
ask their
agree.
questions. And again, you'll get the recording for anyone that had to drop off earlier.
Yes, we will send it via email. Thank you so much, Homa, for taking time to chat about
Oh, my
this. Inshallah,
pleasure.
we can chat about other topics like the mental load and all that stuff as well at some point. I think it's important. And if anyone here needs, whether it's mental health therapy or additional support, you can always email us at info@sakinacanada.com. And then, yes, we'll send the recording. And that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Assalamualaikum,
Assalamu
everyone.
alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining.